Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to the channel. This is part 2 of my shop on wheels. By the way, shop on wheels is just a chop saw and a skill saw to cut metal. That's where the shop on wheels come from. But if you haven't seen part 1 of shop on wheels, there'll be a link in the description. You can go check out the first video of this project. But here in part 2, I wanted to explain the bigger picture, if you will, because I forgot to do that in part 1. That's why I started out by showing you the bigger picture and what we did here on this project. All right, so the whole idea and the overall purpose of us being here and putting this pipe in the ground was to tie this roughly 30 to 35 foot tall feed bin, just tie it to the ground. So as you can see, this 6-inch pipe is drove, all 4 of these 6-inch pieces of pipe are drove in the ground roughly 7 to 8 foot, and they're welded to the feed bin itself. So there's no bolts in the concrete, because there technically shouldn't have to be now, because the pipe in the ground is what's holding this from tipping over whenever the wind blows. Another thing that I didn't share in last week's video, or at least in detail, I think I shared it in a short, which may or may not be up yet from the time of this recording, but this frame, whenever they delivered this feeder, it was a little bit tweaked. So we checked the pad's pretty well level, you know, it's pretty good. So that's how we found out that the frame of this thing must be tweaked a little bit. So to get it level, there had to be a gap between the bottom of that square tubing and the concrete over there, and there had to be a gap here. So we got it happy medium, and then to seal those gaps off, we just took some 10 by 3/8 flat, put up underneath the 8-inch square tubing on both sides, and then we took some 1/2 by 3 flat and put all the way around on each side, and it just capped off. It pretty much just capped everything and made it look nice and more sturdy, if you will. So that's the bigger scope of the project. And like I said, I just wanted to mention that since I forgot to show y'all an overarching picture of our project. It is now the next morning, and just how awesome of a workspace is this? Beautiful shade. I mean, just covered in shade for the most part. How amazing. So we got that one side welded up, and now we got to weld up the other side and then build that gate for the ladder. I can hear the band practicing. Local school over here. It's so motivating and refreshing to start fresh the next morning and have just a lot of stuff to weld. Like, that's just such a empowering feeling, you know, starting fresh. Sometimes it's good, you know, after a long day or after a good hot day. Sometimes it's good to just kind of quit early. I quit right around 5, I think, yesterday, but sometimes if it's even hotter, it's not a bad idea if you find a stopping point a little before then, just to cut loose, you know, go relax, come back the next morning feeling like you could go 110. Of course, we couldn't do any of that without coffee. Good old coffee. What a beautiful life. What a beautiful life. All right, now that cup of coffee's down, we can go ahead and roll out, get geared up. Go ahead and fire this thing up, let her warm up. Do a little welding. Do you hear that? Sounds crispy, doesn't it? Hence the crispy welds hat. If you follow closely, you know that I got this hat from Danny at DHK Welds. Whenever I shared with you in the short, I was like, I don't know what crispy, you know, I'm not sure what he was getting at, but I related it to crispy starch. Well, whenever I was editing this video, I heard this 7018 running on this piece of flat we were welding, and it sounded crispy, and it hit me. It actually hit me before this, but it hit me even deeper, if you will, whenever I was editing this video. So I'm pretty sure that's how this crispy was thought of, if you will. The first time that it hit me was whenever my wife and grandpa pulled up next to me. I was sitting in my truck and he pulled up in his truck, and it was the first time he seen me wearing this hat, and he said, "Crispy welds?" He didn't read the DHK part, he just read crispy welds. And I was like, oh, that's what Danny meant, crispy welds. And so that kind of got me a little closer. But then whenever you hear this crispy weld, literally welding, it all clicks, you know. Crispy welds, baby. I love it. To get your own crispy welds hat and support Danny and everything he's doing, check out the link in the description. With 7018 not in a rod oven, it can be harder to like control, or feel harder to control. So if you were able to see, if you weren't able to see, I was just doing literally like little movements back and forth, and all I'm doing there, sometimes I'm doing little bitty circles, sometimes I'm doing like half moons, but all I'm doing is more or less controlling how the flux breaks off, because since we don't have our 7018 in a rod oven, it toenails worse, which just means your puddle wants to go to one side or the other, and so it just means your flux is burning like at an angle, toenailing. So to kind of control that toenail, I just kind of wiggle it and make little circles, you know, just to kind of, like I said, control the way the flux burns. Try to keep that flux burning even. That way I'm tying into both pieces of material. All right, we'll do that several more times and we'll build us a gate for that ladder. All right, let's take a minute and learn something. I believe I literally just learned this. You know, I talk all the time about there's always room for improvement, and you figure that out the more years you weld, especially with one specific process like stick. You know, just whenever you think, you know, you've got her whooped and there's nothing else to learn, something will give you some fits, like this 7018 toenailing. So what I've started to do, and what's working for me this morning, is I'm rolling my stinger. So I start kind of at an angle like this. Let's go ahead and put a little flux in the stinger, that way it doesn't arc. Well, anyway, I'll just try not to touch the metal. I'll do it down here. So I start at an angle like up here. See how my stinger's angled up this way? And then as I burn, I start to like roll my stinger. So I roll it and I pick it up. I say pick it up. I roll it and I change my rod angle. Like I start to point my rod more down. That's dramatic, and I roll it, but then you gotta remember it's feeding in the whole time. So I roll it and then I feed it in. So I start right here, kind of at an angle, and then I roll my stinger as I'm feeding in. And by the time I'm down to the rod stub, like down about here, I'm like at this point. So I started out like this with my stinger like this, kind of tilted at an angle, and I rolled it as I pushed it in, and that just kept the flux burning a certain way. I don't know how to describe it. I just know it's working for me this morning. so it's not giving me as much fits. And like I said a little bit ago, on that first weld I was doing, you know, little bitty movements, so it's literally just, I learned this in my pipeline years of experience, because with downhill rod you really learn, you really have to manipulate it more versus welding on, like, well, T-joints, you got to manipulate it pretty good, but if you're just welding on like flat plate all the time with 7018, you don't really learn as much as you do. There's lots to learn there too, don't get me wrong, but from my pipeline experience in that bevel and with downhill rod, 70 plus specifically, those of you that are pipeline, you know what I'm talking about, it just does whatever it wants, so you got to learn how to adjust your heat right, and you got to learn how to manipulate that puddle. You got to constantly be doing stuff to get it to do what you want to do, at least when you're learning, from my experience. So that's kind of where I learned, you know, that you got to do whatever it takes. You got to watch your puddle, and you got to just try different things, and that's what I mean, and that's why I wanted to share this little roll with you. That's just kind of what worked this morning. I started at an angle, and I just roll it, and I changed my rod angle. Hope that helps. Try it out, let me know what you think. All right, so an important thing that I wanted to point out about our shop on wheels is how strategic I try to be whenever I'm parking it in my work area. I don't always do this because it's a battle between close, so user friendly, you know, you want your truck close enough, but I always try to keep in mind what I'm working on and where my slag and sparks are going to be thrown. So in this particular situation, let's go over here, I tried to park with the center of my truck, which I'm a little off clearly, center of my truck with the center of, I tried to line this leg of the feed bin up with the center of my truck. That way whenever I shot sparks, it went to the back of my truck instead of my mirrors and my windows. Obviously that can change throughout the day depending on what you're working on. A lot of times I'll park further away, and that seems to help overall, and then I just pay attention to which way I'm throwing sparks whenever I'm working. All right, I got all that seam welded. Now we're gonna build a frame out of 1-inch square, 22 inches by 8 foot tall, with some 1-inch 14 gauge square tubing. All right, here we go. Get her level and tack our 2 ends in. Oh, and square it up. We gotta square it up. Gotta square it up, boys. Can't forget to square it up. Fortunate enough to have us a little level concrete pad to work on now. That is just pretty exciting. I mean, just real exciting. Thinking I need to improvise, because I'm out of jack stands, and I either lose my shade or I lose my grinder holder. I'm gonna say lose my grinder holder. I like that shade. Come on. That's how you stay motivated right there. Hello. We're gonna be tacking with 1/8 60-10. Actually, we're probably gonna be welding the whole thing with 1/8 60-10. We also are gonna need a little ground. Oh yeah. what I'm talking about. Now I just need a stinger. Didn't have my table set, see? Or I guess I should say I'm getting my table set. Because the whole point in building this in jack stands versus just on this concrete pad is to make it, for one, more enjoyable, more comfortable, less hard on the body up here where we don't have to be on our knees, but for two, that concrete could be off just a little. So just in case, I'm just gonna go ahead and build it all in stands. We're gonna put two more cross members, one here, one there, and we'll be ready to skill saw our 14 gauge plate down there. Let's do 19 and 7/8. Must not have my chalk box on my truck, so I just had to make 4 marks down through here and use this 4-foot level. Kind of like using white on this anyway, chalk versus the red chalk I have in my chalk box. Need to get some lime green or something chalk to use on this metal. All right. All right, once I got the sheet cut out with our skill saw, I started tacking it onto our square tubing frame. I tacked everything the way it sits now with 70/18. And then whenever I flipped it over, I welded those welds with 6010, only because 6010 is easier to weld, like in a kind of in like a tight spot, if you will, especially on thin material. And since it's thin material, it doesn't technically need like 7018. Technically, this whole door wouldn't have needed 7018, but I'm trying to slowly practice my 7018, if you will, so that's why I used 7018 on the other side. All right, so I lost my audio in this clip, but what I was saying was to hang this door, I used a piece of 1/2 inch flat and I put it in between this piece of pipe and the door on both sides, and I tacked it, and that's what I set my door on. And then I put a clamp at the top of the door to hold it while I put my 3 barrel hinges on. That, my friends, is what you call a job well done with the shop on wheels. Let's get a close-up. Place for a padlock. Got a 6010 welding stick in there for now. Got our 3 barrel hinges. Got everything seam welded. It's good and hot. End of the day, that is a sense of accomplishment. Look at all these umbrellas. Yes, that's what I'm talking about. It's called motivation. Thanks for stopping by and seeing us today. I hope you enjoyed the video. Most of all, I hope you learned something. If you did, let me know in the comments what you learned. And if you're interested in the grasshopper that we used in today's video, the grinder holder, or even the soapstone, you can find all these things at our website, arosswelding.com/shop. And as always, if you have any questions, let me know in the comments below, or you can text those questions to 405-643-7176. And remember, learn something every day.